just make sure. All right. Today's session will be all about 11 plus math and more about problem solving, because the biggest thing that often students tend to get a little bit nervous around is those big questions, those problem solving questions that sit at the end. And this is specifically for year 5. But if you are in year 4 and you're watching this, then this is definitely something for you to work on as you go through the year, because problem solving is ultimately the next step in math. We do our numeracy, we do our fractions, our ratios, percentages, types of questions, but problem solving brings everything together and makes it really, really useful and also quite relevant to the real world. So a little bit about me for those of you who are uncertain. My name is Gemma Zoe Smith, and I run the Education Hotel, which is a tuition agency. I also run something called Top School and Uni, which is an education consultancy. So I work in education. I am a 3 times Oxford grad. I'm a qualified secondary science teacher and a Royal Society of Chemistry scholar. And I also am an ex-grammar school student myself. So I went to Chelmsford and I took my 11 plus, and it's from there that I went on to Oxford. So I mostly work with teens and tweens, and I help with usually the trickiest of the entrance exams to get into. So whether we're talking grammar, something like QE Boys, or whether we're talking kind of independent and we're looking at something like St Paul's, those students are typically working with me on my team. So if we are looking, this is quite a short session, we're thinking about what should we watch out for when we're doing 11 plus problem solving, then there's 5. I will give you a little bonus one at the end, but there are 5 things mainly that we're looking out for. The first one is timing, and timing is really, really important as we start to get towards these exams. There's not all that much time for those of you who are in year 5, and timing is something that, if you get it right, can make that whole process a lot more comfortable. So if you rush and you make silly mistakes, you're going to have to go back. If you're spending too long on a question, you might end up missing out on others later on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run through the areas, what to watch out for, and then we're going to look at how to tackle each of those areas. So the second area is silly mistakes, and everybody makes silly mistakes. I know that when students come to me, they say, oh, that's not something that happens to me. It happens to everybody. Everyone will make a silly mistake, and most people will make a silly mistake in the real thing. But it's about trying to recognize when you make those silly mistakes and rectify them. And again, I've got some tips for you a little bit later. The third one is about not understanding or misreading the question. So if you are watching this and you're in year 4 or a year 4 parent, mostly that not understanding the question will often apply to you. And you might read it and think, this is definitely a fractions question. I'm going to do fractions and try and work this out. And actually, it might not be. It might be something else that they're wanting you to try. And it might work both ways. One might take a lot longer than the other. So that can be one thing. But the other, a more common issue, which tends to come up a little bit when we get into year 5, we do that year 5 kind of last minute practice, is often misreading the question. Because for loads of you guys, you have been practicing, you've been doing your practice exams, you've been doing your mock exams, practice questions at home. You've seen loads of questions before. And often you'll read a question and think, oh, I did that a couple of weeks ago and I remember it. But you've got to be really careful, because you've got to make sure you're not just answering the question you think it is, but the question it's actually asking. So if they are asking you to work out something to do with a graph, they might not be asking you for the biggest, they might be asking you for the smallest. You've got to be really careful with those words. So making sure that you read the question, you underline the key words, and make sure that you really know what you're answering. Otherwise, you're putting all this time into doing the question and you might not be answering the right one. The fourth thing that we're going to have a look at is information overload. So that's when you get a really, really long question and it goes on and it talks about everything, but you struggle to maybe work out what's it trying to ask. So these are the very, very long, wordy questions. So Mr. and Mrs. Smith go to a fair, and then they bring their children, and then those children go onto the dodgems, and then they do this, and then do this, and then all the way at the end, they want to know how much would it cost them. So information overload is really, really important to be aware of. And then fifth one is not writing or drawing your working out. Now, some questions you might not need to. I'm not saying you need to do it for everything, but there will be certain questions for which it's easier to write, and it's easier to write your working out or to draw. And if you don't write your working out, don't draw the question out, then you might end up making a silly mistake. And it's not because you don't know the answer, it's because you didn't put your working down. And I know that tutors and parents, they say this all the time. So we're always saying, make sure you put your working. And we would say that although mental math is really important, and it's a really great bedrock, writing little bits down, little tiny bits, is always useful. And maybe not for the first time, but when you're going back and checking, it's so much easier to see what you have written. So if I see a sum and go, okay, I can check it. But if I arrive at a question and there's no working whatsoever, then even if I've done it once before, I'm going to have to do the same sum again. And I'm going to have to go through that same process again. But if it's written there, then I can make sure that I'm just checking the actual math. I'm not checking any of the how did I work it out. So sometimes there really is a case for writing or drawing your working out. And a lot of people feel like it slows them down, but often it speeds you up when you're checking. So on we go with a couple of tips. Now, I've taken these slides from a teacher of mine who's been running our summer courses at the moment. So we've got some 11 plus summer courses that we're running. Math has just finished, and so I have taken her slides on exam technique for a couple of these. So you're getting a little sneak preview of what some of our students had over the last week. So I've actually got a question here. It's taken from, I think, an independent paper, and it says, what is the value of 17 times 13 plus 19 times 17 minus 2 times 17? That's a really long question. And there's two ways that you can do it. You see this one at the top. So we've got the 13 plus 19 minus 2 equals 30. 17 times 30 is 510. Well, this person, they looked at the question and they saw that 17 was in every single bit. You see it says 17 times 13, and then you've got 19 times 17, and then you've got 2 times 17. So actually they simplified it into 13 lots of 17, 19 lots of 17, 2 lots of 17, add the 13 and the 19 and take away the 2 lots. So they've only used 2 steps to do that. So they have done 1, which is the 13 plus the 19 minus the 2, and then they've times the whole thing by 17. But the person on the right has done lots of calculation. And that is the way that you see it first of all, because you do 19 times 13, and then we've got 17 times 13, and then we've got 19 times 17, and then we've got 2 times 17. And actually, once we've done that, it's taken a long time. So if you've done 19 times 13, 19 times 17, 17 times 13, and 2 times 17, you've taken quite a lot of time to do that. And then what you do is you then combine your answers. Another version, another long time that it's going to take. So really, when we're looking at tips to speed up working, it's about making sure that you're recognizing that way to kind of really decrease the amount of sums that you have to do, the number of steps that there might be. So you're looking for things that are common. So it might be that if you're doing a question that maybe has a part 1 and a part 2, that the part 1 might be relevant to the part 2. Or if you've got a question that's around one graph, then writing some stuff down on the graph might help you with one of the questions later. So often there's a question, so if you're looking like a timetable or you're looking at a graph question and you are working your way through it, and you're thinking, oh, well, this is interesting, the difference between this one and this one, or the difference of the whole thing as I'm adding them together. Just note those bits of information down, because they might be relevant in the future questions. So worth being aware to speed up our working. This slide is also taken from our summer courses, and it's about silly mistakes and checking your work. So tutors always talk about checking your work, and it's something that there's a checking version where you do the same thing again, and there is a checking where you make sure that you've done a sense check. So this is kind of a quick sense check. So if we had 19 times 17, and they said you get the answer as 823, a kind of quick check would be just to round them. So if I round 19, I go up to 20. If I round 17, I go up to 20. And I know that 2 times 2 is 4, and there's 2 zeros there, so that's 400. But I got an answer of 800. And that means that I need to redo my working. So always have a quick check. A quick check and rounding it up is a really nice way to make sure that you've got your answer and that your answer is about right. So always do that quick sense check, even if you think, yeah, I've 100% got it. So if you've got a long addition and you're doing maybe 336 plus 442, just add the end numbers. Are the end numbers correct? If they're not, then that tells you definitely made a mistake. Round up. So instead of 336, what about 350? So add those together. Again, is it about right? So you're always thinking about checking your work and kind of the silly mistakes, trying to avoid those. So the next one is about answering the question that you are asked, not the one you think it might be, or indeed stopping in the middle of a question. So this is a question that I've taken from I think it's a scholarship exam somewhere, and it talks about, it's a bit of algebra, so it's definitely a year 5 kind of topic. It's kind of one of the harder ones in 11 plus. We've got the perimeter of a rectangle is 14. If the length is 2 centimeters longer than the width, find the area. And I really like using this question. The reason that I like using it is because most people will stop halfway through. So most people will try and work out how much is the length, how much is the width, but then they'll move on because they haven't underlined those key words. They're looking for the area. They're not looking for the length or the width. They are looking purely for that answer. So if you wrote down the length and the width, you don't get the marks. But if you wrote down the area, you'd get it right. So don't stop in the middle of a question. Do make sure that you are highlighting, really going through and making sure that every key word, for example, here, area, would be underlined, because you've got to make sure that you're answering the right stuff. You can't put all that time into finding out length and finding out width and not do that last bit, especially as that last bit is going to be the easiest part. So you really want to make sure that you're using it. Here's an example of an information overload question. So on the way to school, I bought a pack of fruit gums and I ate 2 of them secretly in my music lesson. At break, I shared a third of the remaining ones with my friend. Then I finished the fruit gums, eating an equal amount in each of my next 4 lessons, which was biology, math, English, and art. What is the smallest number of fruit gums that I could have bought? There's loads of words in there, and there's loads of detail. And that detail is a little bit confusing. So get rid of it. Really, what is it in math? And always think about taking your big, long question and putting it into math. And so for this, you've got a certain number that you started with, an X or a question mark. You've minus 2 of them because you ate 2 of them. You shared a third of them, and then you got something, an equal amount in your next 4 lessons. And you're working backwards. So I would use something like a number machine for this. But it's all about making sure that I've taken the right bits of math out, because I don't need to know that that person went to biology, math, English, and art. That's pointless. It's not relevant to the question. So the bits that aren't important need to be taken out, and I would always rewrite that question with math. I wouldn't say that it is easier with detail. So for me, it's much easier as a math question. It's not as easy with all those words in there. And then we've got this one, which is not drawing your working out. So this is a kind of typical question of, I need to make a fence that's 50 meters long. And if I'm spacing the posts 10 meters apart, how many posts do I need? Well, on first look, this seems like it's a really easy question. 50 meters, 10 meters apart. Surely that means that I'm going to need 5, because each one of them is 10 meters apart. But if you start to draw it down, you should realize you've got 1 at the start, and then you've got 10 meters, and then you've got the second one, and then you've got 10 meters, and then you've got the third one, and then you've got 10 meters. It's not about the 5 that you're talking about, isn't the 5 fence posts. That 5 is actually about the gaps. So by drawing just little lines down and putting the 10s in between, it makes it a lot easier to understand. So instead of making a silly mistake on this one and putting down 5, you would be able to see by drawing it out that actually you need an extra one. You need the one that you started with, be able to make a fence that's 50 meters long. And then my last part, which is a bit of a bonus for you guys. I've covered a couple of different types of question. So for me, a fence and fence post question, it's one that typically comes up. We've got an area type question, an algebra area question. Find the types of questions that you find tricky. And this is really important if you're going into year 5. If you're going into your exams in September, so if you're in year 5 at the moment, find the question types that you find tricky and just be aware of them in the exam. So if you know, I'm the type of person that rushes the first few questions because I really want to get going and I know that I can do them really quickly, but I often make silly mistakes in them. And I get lots of students who like this. They'll finish with like 10 minutes to spare, really fast, really great, but the first maybe 5 questions, there might be a silly mistake or even 2 in there because you've rushed to get out, start to make sure that you're ahead of everybody else in the room, but it means that you're going to make a silly mistake. Those are the ones you need to check because you know that that is what you usually do. If you struggle with the wordy questions, slow down a little bit on them. Make sure that you're spending the right amount of time to be able to pull out the words and pull out the math that you need and make sure that you really focus. Some people go through and they say, I really don't like a train timetable question because I find that it's quite hard to work out. Then again, make sure that you are paying particular attention with those types of questions. So if you go through the paper and you see a train timetable question, give it a mark, a ring or a star or a question mark, whatever it is that you're using to tell yourself to go back and check. Because those are the ones that you have normally been not scoring so high in, then those are the ones that are worth checking. And for those of you that are taking your exams in September, everyone has a specific type of question that they struggle with. It's not that you are going in and everybody else is just amazing at everything, because everyone has their own specific area. So you need to be able to identify what yours is. If yours is that you rush, then you know what you need to do. Don't think that everyone around you is either the same, because then they're not necessarily the same, but they've all got those specific areas that they are focusing on. So really, exam technique is about making sure that you're aware of the bits that you are not so great at, or the bits that you maybe don't score so high in, or the bits you've worked really hard to get, and making sure that those are the bits that you go back and look at, because those are where you're going to pick up those extra marks, which might make a difference. All right, perfect. So we've reached the end, and I have to say, to the guys over on Private and Grammar School, thank you ever so much for letting me come on. As per usual, all of the admins that we have are looking through, are making sure that your comments are being answered, and do write them down, do pop them down. And so make sure that we will go back and I'll answer anything that's come up in the comments a little bit later as well, because I know that I'm kind of ever so slightly stretching the time. But for those of you that are watching that have your exams in September, on behalf of all the admin team, but also from myself, I'm wishing you the absolute best of luck.